heroes. There's always the kid that everybody makes fun of. And this kid was definitely a weakling. There's no doubt about it. He was quiet. He was one of those kids. And back in, and one kid opens up his egg, and he's got a butterfly in there, and everybody thinks and ooh and ah and all that sort of thing. Someone else has grass, the growing grass. Somebody has a flower. But when they get to Philip's, there's nothing in the egg. It's empty. It's completely empty. And the kids start to make fun of Philip because his egg is empty. He doesn't understand the assignment. He doesn't get it. All of those sorts of things. They're making fun of him. His little ears are turning red. And the teacher's trying to calm everybody down. And very quietly, little boy says, "Yeah, but the tomb was empty." See, he went to Sunday school. He understood something that the other kids did not understand. And everybody got to thinking about, oh yeah, I guess Philip's right. The tomb was empty. You see, Philip had a reason for clinging to that story, because 2 weeks later he died. The reason he was so sick and weak is because he had cancer and he didn't tell anybody. But when everybody found out that Philip had died, the kids came to the funeral, and they all placed little empty eggs next to his coffin, lined them up. They understood that Philip had held on to that story because he knew he was going to die. When you're a second grader and you know you're going to die, you could be pretty profound. Philip understood that everybody has to face death. But here's the thing. Whether it's second grade, whether you're 92, everybody faces death. No one gets out of this life alive. No one does. It's inevitable. It's only a question of when. But here's the thing that we need to understand. The promise of the Easter story, listen to me on this. It's an empty promise. The cross is empty. The tomb is empty. Even the grave clothes are empty. The promise of Easter is an empty promise. It promises that the tomb is empty because he rose again from the dead, and it says that death is not the end, it is the beginning. And if you put your trust in me, this is what Jesus is saying. You don't have to fear death because he's conquered it. Now listen, this is the truth. If you've never been to this church before, if you don't know who I am, my story of how I became a Christian, I'm big into the whole science thing. In fact, I was a science teacher at one time. I've written books on this subject. I'm big into evidence. I am not a Christian today because my mother is. I'm not a Christian today because I went to Sunday school. I am a Christian today because I studied it out. And the evidence is overwhelming. I became a Christian purely for intellectual reasons, and that's a fact. Jesus was a real historical person. He really lived. He really had followers that changed the world. And the truth is, he really made a lot of people mad. A lot of people in his day thought they were good people and that somehow God would welcome them into heaven because they were so good. This is a common theme. We believe today many people think that the reason they're going to heaven is because they're good people. I ask them this all the time. Why do you think you're going to go to heaven? Because I have very few people I meet say they're going to go to hell. I mean, the vast majority of people I talk to, if they're being serious, well, nobody's perfect. But God is love. And, nobody's perfect, but I'm a good person. And God loves good people like me. Well, that's what the Pharisees said. And Jesus said something else. They didn't like it very much. They didn't like it then, and they don't like it today. They don't like hearing the truth that human beings have offended God. That would include you. Every human being in this room has offended him. You have done things, you have said things, you have thought things that disgust him. Things that God hates. And that is the truth. That's what Jesus said. We are actually worthy of God's anger. Yes, God is love, but how many of you know that God is also just? Oh yes, he's loving. But he's loving enough to say this is right and that is wrong. He is also just. And that is a message that people don't want to hear. They didn't want to hear it then. They don't want to hear it today. But that's the message that Jesus taught. He came here saying one thing. Everyone, everywhere needs to turn away from the self-directed life that you've been leading. You've been calling your own shots. You've been deciding what is right and what is wrong. You've been justifying yourself and saying that you are a good person when in fact you are not, and you know it. You've tried to excuse it away. You've tried to ignore it in some way. You've tried to pretend that God's love will somehow overlook it. And Jesus said the same exact things that I'm telling you this morning. And that's what made the Pharisees so angry. Because they were determined to believe that they could live good enough to impress God. They'd walk into the doors of heaven as the heroes because they were so wonderful. And Jesus said, you're like a bunch of whitewashed tombs. You look good on the outside. On the inside, you're full of greed and malice and hate. You've offended God. And they were offended by hearing that. But here's the truth. Romans chapter 3, verse 23 says, we have all done wrong. Not some, not the occasional, but all of us. We have all done wrong. We have all sinned. We all fall short of God's standard of what is good. That is a fact. And what's the penalty? Romans chapter 6, verse 23. The reward that you earn for having offended God is death, corruption, destruction of your relationships. You see it all around you. You see it in the relationships that you have, your marriages, with your kids, destruction. You see it all around you. And eventually physical death. And that is a fact. We have offended God, and the penalty is death. We deserve a separation from him, and that separation is called hell. People don't like to hear that. But here's the good news. This is why we come here on Easter. Here's the whole point. This is the message, and here's what matters. That Jesus is actually God in the flesh. That he lived an absolutely flawless and perfect life. Now look at that. It says that the penalty for sin is death, but Jesus had never sinned. And because he had never sinned, tasting death literally caused a cosmic collision between the law of sin and death and the laws of God. And when they clashed together, it was like two cosmic freight trains hitting each other at 100 miles an hour. It literally caused death to work backwards. And Jesus rose this morning. That's what happened. And when he rose from the dead, he walked out of that grave with a perfect, flawless body. And he swears by himself that if you put your trust in him, he will substitute his perfect, sinless life for your sinful, messed up life. See, you have an account with God. And no matter how good you are, let us pretend for a moment that from this moment forward, you never, ever, ever make another mistake. You never lie again. You never cheat. You never steal. You never even think about lying, cheating, stealing, adultery, or murder. Nothing. You live a perfect life from this moment forward. It can never erase what you've already done. Never. Because it's already done. It's already forever. How many of you know you can't change anything even 5 minutes ago? It is as far away from your touch, even minutes ago, as the kings of Egypt are. They're no closer to you than what you said or thought even 5 minutes ago. You can't fix the past. You can't change it. But here's the good news. Jesus said, I will take your account and I will wash it in my own blood. And everything that's on your account will be washed away as if it never existed in the first place. That's the Easter message. That's the whole point. Listen, no one else in all of history has ever claimed to live the sinless life and be willing to offer that life as a substitute for yours. No one else has done that. No religion offers that. There are plenty of religions on this planet. There are plenty of ways that men have come up with, their own little philosophies. There are teachings of demons out there that people follow. People will worship rocks and trees and their own ideas. But their religious leaders out there have never offered their own lives as a substitute for the lives of their followers. No one's ever done that except Jesus. Muhammad didn't do it. Muhammad, who founded Islam, what he basically said was, God's mad at everybody. And I have no idea whether or not even I will be saved from the pits of hell. All you can do is try to live a good life, and maybe God will like you. No kidding. I've read the Quran. That's what it says. Try to keep all the rules. Try to keep all the rules. Can anybody keep all the rules? No. And it leads to a hopelessness. That is why followers of Islam will strap dynamite to themselves and blow themselves up. Because there's one little teaching in there that says if you die in the cause of their God, then you get to go to heaven, for sure. See, we in America, we don't understand why people are willing to strap dynamite to themselves or fly a plane into a building. We would never do that. But they will in their desperation because they know they can't keep the rules. Well, you can't either. But Muhammad did not offer his life as a substitute for his followers. He just put hopelessness upon them. A hopelessness that drives them to jihad today. No other person. Buddha did not offer. Gautama Buddha did not offer his own life as a substitute. He just said, I've been enlightened. If you meditate long enough and hard enough, you might be able to forget all of your misery. Maybe. That's my enlightenment? Wow. That's not a substitute. That's not a substitute. Joseph Smith didn't offer it. L. Ron Hubbard, who founded Scientology, the only thing he offered is you could be broke and I'll give you some interesting ideas. You just give me all your money. That's what Scientology is all about. You want to get to the highest level, it'll only cost you $100,000. No. Jesus offered his life as a substitute for yours. And the truth of the matter is, it's free. It's free. All you got to do is accept it. All you got to do is accept it. Now, when you look back in history, I said I'm a person that studies history. I don't believe this stuff because it's a good idea. I studied it out. The facts are in. The science is in. There really is a God. He really created the heavens and the earth. And the truth of the matter is that when we look at the story of Jesus, you are going to have to come to terms with that empty tomb. You have to come to terms with it. Because he really did die, and that is a fact. And he really was buried. They checked to make sure he was dead. They didn't like him. They wanted to make sure of it. So the evidence is in. He really did die. And he really was put in a grave. They put a 2-ton stone over top and sealed it with a Roman seal. That Roman seal said, if you break this, you get crucified. Nobody wanted to be crucified. They put a small detachment of Roman soldiers who are the single most trained, vicious soldiers in the history of the human race. And they were guarding this tomb. If they failed at their duties, they would be burned alive. They knew the penalty. This was the 21st century. But the tomb was empty this morning. The rock that was over it was thrown away. The Roman guards ran out of fear. because an earthquake shook the ground, and an angel came down and threw that stone away and sat down on top of it like, hey, what you going to do? And Jesus rose from the dead. And the witnesses are there. Now, they knew it was empty. Jewish leaders knew it was an empty tomb. They had to find some way to explain it away, or they'd lose their power over people. The Romans knew it was empty. They had to find some kind of an explanation. How are we going to explain this? They said, oh, well, the disciples stole the body. Right. You got some fishermen and a couple of guys here that are running for their life, and they're going to go up against the world's most powerful soldiers, roll away a 2-ton stone, steal the body. Oh, by the way, we're going to leave the grave clothes, which means we have to unwrap him first. 75 pounds worth of stuff. Take a naked body out, just so that we could go say that he rose again from the dead. Oh, and by the way, we get to all be tortured to death for our testimony. And there is exactly zero evidence within history that any of the disciples ever recanted. They went to their graves, all of them, went to their graves saying, we saw him. He was alive, willing to die for it. That's powerful testimony. Powerful stuff. But you know, all of the arguments and all of the evidence that we have, and we've got very good arguments and very good evidence. And you can listen to me today. You may be a young person going, I don't care. It happened a long time ago. It doesn't matter to me. I got other things to do. I got people to text. I'm off. You may be an older person that's going, I've heard it before. I come to church on Easter. I've heard the story. Thank you very much. Can we go off to lunch now? I understand that. Listen, this story can be as empty to you as the tomb was empty. It could be an empty promise to you. Because listen, it's not enough to say, yeah, it's probably true. How many of you know the devil knows it's true? Satan and the demons know it was true. They were there. They were witnesses. They know it was true. Just knowing it is true does you no good. It's empty. Doesn't do you any good unless you do something with this story. It accomplishes nothing. And that's the key that I want you to get first. Listen to me on this. This is really, really important. God wants your real self. He wants the real you. He wants your heart. He wants you to walk out of this place 100% committed to knowing him and to following him, doing things his way in life for the rest of your life. He wants that from you. He wants nothing less. But there's a problem. Many people hear this story, and by next Tuesday, they've forgotten it. It just goes in this year and write out that one. You may even understand the concepts. You get this whole idea. Oh, yeah, I've heard that. This whole idea of Jesus substitutes his sinless life for my sinful one. Yeah, that's pretty cool. You get the concept, but it doesn't affect you. You're indifferent to it. It doesn't change your day-to-day life in any way, and in fact, you'll basically forget it. Now, I want you to know something about this. I'm not trying to come down on you. I'm trying to shake you right to your toes, because Jesus described people who listen to this story and it's empty to them. He described it in Mark chapter 4, verse 3. Listen to the story. Jesus said, listen. Now, whenever Jesus says listen, it's in your best interest to pay attention. He said, a farmer went out to plant some seed. And as he scattered it across his field, some seed fell on a footpath, and the birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on shallow soil with underlying rock. The plant sprang up quickly, but it soon wilted beneath the hot sun, and it died because the roots had no nourishment in the shallow soil. Now, other seed fell among thorns that shot up and choked out the tender blades so that it produced no grain. Still other seed fell on fertile soil and produced a crop that was 30, 60, or even 100 times as much as had been planted. And then he said, anyone who is willing to hear should listen to what I just said and understand it. And he walked away from that. And his own followers went, huh? I don't get it. And Jesus is just shaking his head. You see, Jesus taught in parables. The word parable in Greek is parabola, and it means placing one thing by the side of another. In other words, I'm going to take a powerful spiritual truth, and I'm going to line it up with a common idea that everybody gets. Everybody understands the concept of a farmer or a gardener throwing out seeds. We all can see that in our minds. We're all familiar with it. And he's trying to say the powerful spiritual truth that you need to understand is exactly the same. This is like this. That's what a parable means. But he also taught in parables, listen, because parables are a lot like a lure, like a fishing lure. Jesus said, I'll make you fishers of men. So he throws out a lure. And if you're swimming by and you like what you see, you're going to take a bite. And what he's trying to say is he's saying a person, this is what he said, anyone who's willing to hear. If you're willing to hear, you're going to ask, what does this mean? That's the lure. The whole point is to try to get the people who want to know to reach out and grab it. They're going to ask. Now, in this case, now it's really powerful here. It's written in verse 10, and I didn't put it up here, but in the Greek, it's emphatic. Jesus says, if you don't understand this parable, you won't understand any of the parables, anything that I taught. In fact, if you don't understand this, you won't understand anything in the Bible at all, period. This is the most important thing that he taught. That's pretty impressive. That's what the Greek is trying to say. So Jesus explains this beginning in verse 14. Because listen to me today. I explained the Easter story to you. I laid it all out. You've heard it before. But it won't affect you unless you understand this. Now here's what he's saying. Verse 14. The farmer that I talked about, Jesus is speaking. He says, this is the one who brings God's message to others. That would be me. I'm bringing the message to you. I'm the farmer, and I'm throwing out the seed of the Word of God right here, right now. This parable is happening right in front of your eyes, and it's happening to you. The message of God, listen, the Easter story I just laid out. In fact, if you're a Christian and you've already accepted the Easter story and it already has changed your life, how many of you know there's other teachings that he has for you? Lots. Any teaching that God has for you, it's like a seed. In fact, that word, message of God or seed here, the word in Greek is logos. It means teaching or reason. In other words, the teachings, the reasoning of God's thinking has a potential. Listen, it has a potential to cause good, to cause benefit, to cause fruitful growth in your life. It has the potential. He's explaining something. He's saying that potential to you, that value of that teaching, it depends on something. It depends, just like a seed depends on the condition of the soil that it lands in, so it is the teachings of God. This story about Easter, it depends on the condition of your soil, your heart. The condition of your heart. Now, what is that? You see, the soil of your heart, listen, it's your attitude. It's your attitude towards the teaching, and it's an attitude you choose. I was a high school teacher for long enough to know the I don't care attitude when I see it. My classroom was loaded with them. And you spend most of your time as a teacher trying to break through the I don't care about this subject attitude. And there are teenagers, there's lots of them, that would choose to care because they got a scholarship they want, or they want to make mom happy, or maybe they actually like biology. Not when I was the teacher. But anyway, the truth of the matter is, some of them would choose it. And I, as a teacher, I'm going to pour myself into those kids, right? But when the I don't care ones get their grade and their parents show up blaming me, how many of you know I am glad I'm not a teacher anymore? But anyway, the truth of the matter is, I would fall back to that. Well, your kid didn't care. He didn't do anything. In fact, I had an experiment. Every year, I would give the first exam in my class. And here's what I would do. No kidding. 2 days before the exam, I would give the test with all the answers to every kid. Every single kid. Here's the test. Here's the answers. See you on Friday. No tricks. 3/4 of my class would still fail. Flat out F. And what I would do is I would put it in their file. I had a file on every kid. So that when the parent came in to complain to me, I'd say, well, here's the test with all the answers that I gave them 2 days before. Here's your kid's test. That demonstrates something. What do you think? Now, all of a sudden, I'm not the bad guy anymore. The kid is going to get in trouble. Yes. Okay, but anyway, truth of the matter is, the attitude that you have is a choice that you make. And Jesus is saying through this parable, there are 4 choices that you can make. Now, you listened to the Easter story this morning, and pretty soon you're going to get out of here. You only have to listen to me for another few minutes. But you have 4 choices on how you're going to respond to this. Here's the first, verse 15. It says, the seed that fell on the hard path represents those who hear the message, but when then Satan comes at once and takes it away from them. Now, it says hard path or wayside, and that word is hodos in Greek. And it means a traveled road, or it means a manner of thinking, feeling, or deciding. In other words, this is a person who has already made up their mind, I don't care. I don't care. It's stupid. I don't need this. I got other things to do. I'm offended by the fact you say I've offended God. I mean, they come up with something. And what it is they've made up their mind to be unyielding. That is an attitude that simply won't be impressed. I tell you that Dr. Henry Morris has a PhD in hydrology. He also had a doctorate degree in theology. This is a person in who's who, one of the smartest people in the last 100 years. And he wrote to say that based on all the rules of evidence, the fact that Jesus rose from the grave can be adjudged the best proved fact in all of ancient history, period. And if you have the attitude of I don't care, that won't impress you. You won't care that C.S. Lewis, one of the smartest people in the last 100 years, fell on his face and said Jesus is Lord because he couldn't explain away the resurrection. But if you choose to have the attitude that is hard, that is unyielding, that refuses to be impressed, that refuses to be changed, it doesn't matter what evidence. You could have been a witness and saw Jesus rise from the dead and wouldn't have believed. Don't you think the Pharisees were there? They were there. They knew the tomb was empty. They knew that the guards had run off. They knew that everybody was running around saying that Jesus rose from the dead. They could see that no matter how much they beat and whipped and tried to kill all these witnesses, they just kept springing up. They were there. They witnessed it. They were there when Lazarus was raised from the dead, and they tried to kill him too. Why? Because they had chosen the attitude. They had a manner of thinking, a manner of feeling, a manner of deciding that hardened. Why? Because they knew if they accepted it, just like you know if you accept it this morning, that it's going to force you to change your life. And you don't want to. You don't want to. So it won't do you any good. And this will be an empty story to you. just like it was an empty tomb. See, that's the key. Listen, that Easter story. And Christian, any teaching from God, this is the key. Any teaching from God will do nothing for you unless you decide to care. Some people think that a hard heart is hard to break. No, it's not. One choice. You can do it right now. You can make up your mind to care. See, God cared enough to make sure you were here this morning. God cared enough that you're watching this on the internet. God cared enough to get the story right in your face. If you choose to have a hard heart, do you no good at all. You got to choose to care. Well, Jesus goes on. Verse 16, he says, the rocky soil represents those who hear the message. They receive it with joy, but like young plants in such soil, their roots don't go very deep. And at first they get along fine, but they wilt as soon as they have problems or are persecuted because they believed the word. There are plenty of people like that. They'll hear it. They'll get it. But something's wrong. They're shallow. In fact, the word receive here in is lambano, and it means take as with the hand. In other words, he's describing somebody who makes it. They understand it. They get it. All right, my sinful life, he substitute. I get it. I get the story. I get that it's supposed to change my life, that I'm supposed to walk out of here committed to following Jesus and his ways. I understand the concept. But you're shallow. Now, what do we mean by shallow? In fact, the Greek actually uses the word immediately twice here. Immediately receive it, and they immediately grow. But you see, that's really describing a person that is, listen, run by their feelings. They didn't count the cost. You want to follow Jesus? It will cost you your whole life. It will cost you everything you do. You will no longer have the freedom to just go off and do whatever you want to do. If you want to follow Jesus, there's a price. And people who are run by their feelings, who are led by their emotions, they don't think about the cost. And you can see people like this, whether they're Christians or not. They run into a relationship. They're instantly romantic. They're instantly getting sexually involved. They don't think it through. They don't have the consequences in their minds. They don't count the cost because they're being run by their emotions. We see this in marriage counseling all the time. People that are fighting and they're on the edge of divorce, and one of the reasons that they are is because they're instantly easily offended because they're listening to their emotions and their feelings instead of doing things God's way. And when you are run by your feelings, when you just respond to an occasional tear or an excitement, you will be shallow. See, listen, roots, I also have a little tree trimming business. I know something about trees, okay? And when you see roots like this, the problem with roots like this is that when the groundwater evaporates, this tree cannot get the nutrients that it needs. So unless it's constantly a wet environment, and that's why you'll see that are like this in a tropical environment, but not around air. If you do, they will die. Because when that water evaporates, they can't get down deep. Now, when you see a tree that's really healthy, what it's done is it's pushed down very deep. Down deep. You see, and what this is describing, listen, this is a person who's like that first tree. They soak up experience. They soak up excitement, but they're not willing to do the hard work of changing their life. They're not willing to do the hard work of obeying Jesus in how they live. See, when you're willing to do the hard work, you're pushing your roots down deep. Now, here's a hard truth that I need as kind of a segue. How many of you know that all of us have rocks in our soil? Everybody does. Now, the question is, how many rocks do you have? Now, I happen to be related to farmers, Saskatchewan farmers. I use them as illustrations all the time. And one of the things that I have discovered is that farmers are constantly rooting rocks out of the ground. They know they're not going to get them all, so why is it that every time they see a rock, they're going to reach down and grab it and chuck it out? Because they know that the fewer rocks that I have in my soil, the better the soil is. You as a Christian or you as a non-believer have got to face this. What is a rock? A rock is an area. Listen, it's an area, it's an attitude, it's a belief, it's a part of your thinking that is not yet under the authority of Jesus Christ. It's unyielding. It's a place where you go, you know what, God, I'm good except for this area. I'll keep this to myself. Very much. You know the Bible tells you to be living a certain way, and you're going, yeah, but. That is an unyielding area. It's a rock. The more you have, the more shallow you are. And if you're shallow, you're in danger of wilting. You may be growing as a Christian. You may be coming to church. Things may be changing in your life. But you got so many rocks that when, and here's the next two words, when problems come. The word problems in Greek is phlepsis. It means a pressing together or pressure. The boyfriend comes down on you and says, move in with me. We'll get married sometime in the future. You know God says no to this, but it's an unyielded area in your life. You love your boyfriend more than you love God, so you give in. Rocks. When problems come, when pressure comes, you fall away, you wilt, you quit. Or when persecution comes, and this is hard too. The word is diogos or diogomos in Greek, and it means to cause to suffer because of belief. How many of you know that in our culture today, it's getting harder and harder and harder to be a Christian? The persecution is coming down. We're called bigots and haters. Our businesses are being attacked by literally domestic terrorists right here in our country, right now. The persecution is coming down upon us because of our beliefs. Will you stand? If you've got too many rocks in your life, that'll be too hard and you'll quit. You'll give up. But you know what? Rocks are also a choice. Just as that farmer has to reach down by choice and grab a rock and throw it out, so do you. So do you. If there's an unyielded area in your life, this is what you need to do, and that's the key. We need to constantly, consistently, every day be giving up holdout areas in our life to the authority of Jesus Christ. That's finding the rocks and throwing them out. And everybody needs to do it. Everybody does. Now, Jesus went on to explain the third type of ground, thorny ground. Verse 18. It says, the thorny ground represents those who hear and they accept the good news. Jesus died for my sins. Wow, that's cool. But all too quickly, the message is crowded out by the cares of this life, by the lure of wealth, by money, and by the desire for nice things. So no crop is produced. Listen, there's nothing wrong with money, and there's nothing wrong with nice things, and there are cares in this world we got to deal with. But we cannot afford to let them crowd out what God is we need to do with our lives. Because if we do, we're allowing the thorns to crowd us out. Now listen to me on this. I have relatives that are farmers, but I am not a farmer. Every time I try to be, I grow weeds. I try. I get out there. I bust my rear end. I'm going to get it this time, and I've got all kinds of stuff, and I end up with weeds. I didn't plant weeds, but I get them. You know why? Because the soil is preoccupied. It was occupied before I got there. I wanted to plant watermelons and that, and there's already weeds. In fact, a wheat farmer, on average, will plant 60 pounds of wheat seeds in an acre. 60 pounds of wheat seeds to sow an acre. But there's already 3,000 pounds of weed seeds already in the soil before he ever drops a single wheat seed. It's preoccupied. It's easy to be preoccupied, to be crowded in your thinking. See, the Easter story tells you, make Jesus the king of your life. Or a Christian comes to this church and hears a teaching that they need to incorporate into their life. But you allow other things to preoccupy your time. You allow other things to preoccupy your attention or your focus, and it simply crowds out what God is doing, and that's what a thorn is. God has given us safeguards for this. Why do you think we have a church? We have a tradition of being here on a Sunday to help give you an anchor point so that the cares of this world don't keep you from coming and focusing in. But if you allow the cares of this world to keep you from coming on a Sunday morning, you've already lost. The thorns are already crowding it out. Yes, it's a sacrifice in order to get up and come to church, but it's a sacrifice to reach down and pull weeds. You got to pull them out. You cannot allow it. It says, what three things? He says, the cares of this world. It also says the lure of wealth. One of the reasons we give at this church is because it forces you to budget. It forces you to not allow yourself to be so overcome with the desire for wealth that you don't keep that under control. And one of the ways you can is by giving. We provide a way for you to avoid these thorns. And it says the desire for nice things. When you come in here, that's called covetousness. When you learn to seek first the kingdom of God, what did you memorize last week? What did I tell you to memorize? Everybody's going to say, I wasn't here. Look, Matthew chapter 6, verse 25. Yeah, there you go. Some of you got it. See, when we learn these things, it's pulling out the thorns. Now, what he's saying is the message can grow, but there's no fruit because there's so much competition with all the resources from the weeds. When you allow the world's priorities to become your priorities. We have a hard time getting people to come here on Tuesday night to pray because they've got too many things that are competing with their time. You got to watch Dancing with the Stars. You can't be here. Right? We have a hard time getting people to come on a Thursday night and bring their kids to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ because, CSI is on Thursday night. The cares of this world. I'm too tired. I've worked all day. The deceitfulness of riches. We allow it to crowd out the growth that we so desperately need and that a place like this offers because there's thorns in our life. You know what a thorny person looks like? The rest of the world. This is the kind of person you didn't know was a Christian because they look just like the rest of the world. They sound just like the rest of the world. You find out, oh, I'm a Christian. Really? I didn't know. Okay, if you didn't know, they think they're a Christian. They aren't. They just loaded with thorns. There's no fruit. Does that make sense? That's the key. Listen, you and I need to learn to literally run from the 21st century obsession with upgrading our stuff, hoarding wealth, everything, live, eat, and sleep, the latest investment in your retirement and this, that, and the other. You know what? It's just little green pieces of paper. And one of these days, if the economy crashes, it's all going to go up in smoke anyway. So quit worrying about that. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness and all that other nonsense I'll add to you anyways. That's what we've got to learn to do. We got to quit trying to satisfy our every desire and say, I follow Jesus. That's what I'm about. Now, I've been following Jesus for a while, and I'm here to tell you, it's by far more satisfying on this side of the tracks. God has indeed added to me all these other things. I am in the process of moving right now. I got so much junk, I don't know what to do with it because God has overloaded me with blessings. I didn't have to go chase wealth. I'm already in the top 5% wealthiest people in the entire world compared to the people that we've preached to overseas. We're going to Haiti in January. You ought to go. That'll give you a new perspective on things. Here's the last one. So, but these are the ones that are sown on good ground. These are people who they do three things. Look, they do three things. They hear it, they accept it, and they act on it. They bear fruit. Listen to me again. You've heard it. The question is, will you accept it? And then if you're willing to accept it, will you do something with it? Or will the Easter story just be an empty promise to you. You see, if you're willing to hear that Jesus died on the cross for your sins, that he calls you to give up your life to follow him, if you choose this morning to accept that. Now, if you're already a Christian, you say, well, I've already heard it and I've already accepted it. Are you bearing fruit? Are you growing? Are you doing? Have you heard the book of James, chapter 1, verse 19, that says you got to be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. Have you applied that in your marriage, or are you still screaming at each other? If you're still screaming at each other, you're not bearing fruit. You're not obeying what it says. The list goes on. And if you choose to accept it, you need to bear fruit. We will help you here. We have lots of classes to help you bear fruit. We're about making disciples and setting you free to go change the whole world. That's what we're all about. But the question is, which heart are you going to have? Let's review them, and then we'll be done. The hard heart. Listen, if you've got a hard heart this morning, here's what you need to do. You need, and here's your challenge, you've got to get serious with him. You've got to choose to care this morning. You can make that choice right now. In other words, you got to pursue commitment. That's what you need. Now, what if you're listening to me and you go, sounds like the shallow heart to me. Well, then God is challenging you to confess any area of your life that's still a holdout of his authority. What do you need to pursue? Obedience. That's how you change the shallow heart. How about the crowded heart? The heart with all the thorns. What do? Well, God is challenging you to reprioritize your life, to tear out the weeds, reprioritize your life. And if that means you got to set your alarm earlier in order to get here, that's what you do. I love this church and I want you to be a part of it. We don't have a Saturday night service right now. We will later. But if you can't get here find a church that has a Saturday, do what it takes. Pull out the thorns. If that's your heart, you need to pursue a single-mindedness. I follow Jesus one way or another. If that means finding a church with the Saturday night, if that means getting up earlier, if that means getting more committed, if that means I'm going to start tithing, whatever it takes, I'm going to have a single-mindedness of my purpose. But here's our goal. It's the fruitful heart. If that's you and you want to be there, then God is challenging you to invest your whole life into following him. Invest everything. All that you do, all that you say, all that you think. That's what it means to pursue a fruitful life. You want to have a great marriage? You need a fruitful life. You want to be a great parent? You need a fruitful life. You want to find your way through the economic mess that we call the 21st century? You need a fruitful life. You want to get rid of the fear of what's going to happen tomorrow because you see the whole world going up in flames? You need a fruitful life. If you want to have hope that when you get to heaven, you're going to have something to show for it instead of getting in there with your robes being nice and singed on the way in, then you need to pursue a fruitful life. Let's pray.